Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I feel as somebody who does research and writes about the Shinkansen, it's very important that I start my presentation on time. One day, you will die. Feel free to leave now. This is the opening sentence of my book dealing with disaster responses to the flight JL123 crash. It may seem a bleak way to start this presentation, but it's not meant to be. If anything, it's meant to be inspirational, and I hope to show why that's the case during the course of the presentation. Over 3 decades of academic work have allowed me to have opportunities to come to Japan to do research and provided me with deep insights into its society and culture. I very much consider my background is Japanese studies. While many of my publications cater to the academic community, some have resonated with wider audiences. Additionally, I've authored 3 novels and am currently working on 2 more. This presentation aims to explore the benefits and challenges of incorporating fieldwork observations into fiction, as well as examine how novels can serve as a medium to promote research findings or educate readers about specific topics. Due to the financial problems that Cardiff University management claimed that the university has, and how they have been handling this, and to save the jobs of younger colleagues and to try to secure some sort of future for Japanese provision at Cardiff University, earlier this year I took voluntary redundancy. So effectively, I'm now unemployed. I am currently at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, just down the road, on a 4-month Japan Foundation fellowship, which by chance I got notification 4 days after I decided to leave Cardiff University. And I'm spending every day writing 4 books at the same time. Well, not technically at the same time, an hour and a half on each throughout the day. Though only one of these is actually the focus of the fellowship, so don't tell the Japan Foundation what I'm doing. As well as the academic book I'm writing as part of the fellowship, I'm writing 2 other non-fiction books, although one contains some creative writing which I did in a somewhat dreamlike state some years ago, and I'm not looking forward to having to reread when it comes to the editing stage, and also one of the novels at the moment. After I returned to the UK in mid-January, other than doing the final touches to the books, I have no fixed plans. So if you or your university are looking for anybody who needs to do some short-term teaching on things related to Japan, disasters and so on, you know where to find me, contact details and so on. So with all of these various changes happening in my life, I'm speaking today in some ways to seek advice from you all, but also I hope by taking you through the journey of how I got to where I am and what I've been writing, at least one of you will find something of some use today. So some background and further detail about my academic writing. My first book, which was based on my PhD, was about education reform in Japan, in particular the influence of Prime Minister Nakasone in the 1980s. I then went on and did a book about the Shinkansen bullet train and the way it reflects and also influences Japanese society and culture. All of these bits of research continue to some degree. I've then also done 2 books related to the world's deadliest plane crash, which happened in Japan in 1985, flight JL123. And I've also done a more of a textbook style book, which last year just came out as a 2nd edition called Japan, the Basics. That one sells better than the others because it's at a price which people can actually consider buying. Academic books tend to retail at north of $100, £75 I think these days. Even the e-book tends to be quite high. Whereas Japan the Basics, I think it's around about $20, £15, something like that. So it's almost affordable. Okay. Ones which I do myself to publish, I try to keep cheaper. Having said that, there is interest in the Shinkansen and plane crashes beyond academia, so I do write my books taking that readership into account. And considering readership is something that I've been hearing coming up in a lot of presentations today. Think about your readers. Something I'm very conscious of, it's something I talk about in the start of all of my books, where I sort of point out who I'm thinking about the readers. And of course, readers have a wide range of interests, wide range of backgrounds, and you're not going to make every reader happy the whole time. And there are times where you've just got to put stuff in there, knowing that some readers aren't going to enjoy this bit, but hey, this is the great thing about books and so on, you can quickly skip on to the next bit. Unfortunately, when you're sitting listening to somebody's presentation and they're talking about stuff you don't want to listen to, you're kind of stuck here. Sorry. Emergency exit to the right. Then I've also done a number of chapters and articles as well, building on previous research and looking at different areas. So looking at also things like contents tourism, memory studies, disaster narratives, and dramatizations of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. My current research is primarily related to symbols, which brings in together research from throughout my career, but is essentially looking much more at what most people would understand as being symbols and categorizing them into three areas. It's just academia is always a little bit of a game. This is not sort of fixed or anything like that. It's not particularly practical in everyday life, but I find it interesting to be looking at the differences between those symbols which we learn, but we don't have any memory of when we learnt them, or we've got a knowledge so that we can interpret a symbol, pictogram, very easy to understand. As long as you've been to Japan at some stage or another, that pictogram of a sumo wrestler, you know straight away what it stands for. The next group up are the ones which you learn through school, a member of society, where the meaning wouldn't be immediately obvious always. And I put emoji in that group rather than the first group, because there are some emoji where the meanings don't quite mean the same across cultures, for example. In polite company, the obvious example one to give is the praying hand one, which in Japan means thank you, whereas in Britain, America, it means praying. There is another emoji which we can talk about over dinner time and the problems that one causes. I think some people know what I'm talking about. And then at the top are the ones where most people do not know these symbols. If you're into it, you know it. If you're not, you're not. So the prime example there is Kamon, the family crests, where one study has suggested around about 70% of Japanese people don't even know their own family crest, let alone being able to read other family crests. So I'm looking at these various things because it interests me, and hopefully it'll interest other people when I write it. Alongside this, and this is going to be sudden swerve to the left, which you won't be expecting unless you've looked at my profile, is I'm writing two books related to the 1980s British band Frankie Goes to Hollywood. The one on the left started out as a COVID project, and we're now 5 years on from COVID, and it hasn't quite got finished, but it will be coming out next year. Not looking at the history of the band itself, but looking at why people are fans of the band. This allowed me to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole looking at the Japan connections and so on. And in promoting and saying I'm writing this book, a publisher approached me and said, would you also write a book going through each of their songs? So I said, yep, fine, whatever, do that. So those two are keeping me busy. And then, as I said, I've done 3 novels to date. This is really pretty much where my focus is going to be for the rest of the talk. You'll probably be relieved to hear. As you can probably tell from the covers, all 3 of these books are set in Japan, and to some degree or another are based upon things which I've been able to see and experience either just by visiting and living in Japan at times, or through the course of my field work, which is where things can get a little bit murky, I would say, and I will come back to. First thing I want to say is how I got started on writing novels. We've all heard the thing where everybody's got a novel inside them and all the rest of it. I've always enjoyed writing to a degree, but I one day went to a training course which was mostly for PhD students, given by Maurizio Ascari when he was visiting Cardiff University. And he was saying that in the morning, to get your brain booted up to get your fingers moving and everything for your academic writing, just do some free writing. Just spend half an hour, no more than an hour, just writing anything. And I thought, yep, that makes sense. And then I thought, but if I do an hour, we'll make the maths easy for the time being. If I do an hour's writing each day, because I type very quickly and it changes from computer to computer, I've literally just bought a new computer whilst I was in Japan. On this computer, I can do around about 1,500 words per hour. On my older ones, it was 1,000 words. Let's do 1,000. So that means over the course of a week, that's 5,000 words. Over the course of 10 weeks, that's 50,000 words. That's a short novel already in 10 weeks. Okay, 20 weeks, it's getting to be quite a long novel. My first novel did not take 20 weeks. It took much closer to about 6 or 7 years because it went on to hiatus for a couple of years. But it just shows doing bits and pieces day by day, it can all add up. And whilst he was suggesting just write anything, I could see how I could start putting it all together. And the first one was much more of a planner book. The other ones have been sort of much more of the, although I personally do not like jazz, I totally got the analogy in one of the presentations earlier on talking about jazz where there's a structure, but you also do the freestyle around it. I do like that image much more than I like the sound. So I decided I was going to write a novel. The question is, what to write? I've been spending time on the Shinkansen, researching the Shinkansen. And a lot of this goes back to something I was told by an English teacher when I was about 7 or 8 years old, where we had to do essay writing in one class every week. And they said, write about what you have experience on, which is not very helpful advice for a 7 or 8-year-old because you don't actually have much experience of anything. And we just wanted to write about dinosaurs, which we had no experience of. Anyway, I've always held that advice as much as I could. My PhD topic was chosen for that reason rather than what my real interest was. But I then managed to get connections in the Japanese railway companies. I knew I could go and visit them and so on. And quite often, most of my trips to Japan have been short 1-2 week trips, which meant I could be on a JR pass. And every now and again, I'd have a day free. And it's just like, I could sit around in Tokyo. Or I can jump on the Shinkansen and go somewhere just because. And so I was quite often doing that. And sometimes I would pop out to Yuzawa because then you can go and jump in the onsen and so on as well. And just gradually I started getting little ideas about, well, I could do something with this. I could set a story on how would you hijack a Shinkansen, for example. And I spent time thinking this through, thinking through the things that I observed at the various JR companies and so on. I think it was because I started doing this, and also another comment which I made to my students about a comment I'd made at a conference exactly a week before 9/11, that in one of my module evaluation forms, one of my students wrote down, the one thing I've learnt more than anything else during this course is Dr. Hood would make a great terrorist. Not exactly the endorsement I was looking for, but never mind. But anyway, I decided the hijacking would be part of the story. It's actually only half of the story. But I could use this knowledge and experiences. I also decided I wanted challenges. And I do this with most of my books. So the first book, Hijacking Japan, when I was putting it together, it was around about the time that the TV series 24 was still quite popular with its real-time format. And I thought, can we do this with writing? And I decided there was a way of doing it. It's a little bit forced, but it kind of works, I think. So I worked on the basis that the average person speaks at around about 170 words per minute. So I then did every chapter at that speed. So if a chapter is 1 minute long, it's 170 words. If it's 10 minutes long, it's 1,700 words. And so it progresses in that format, which when it comes to editing is an absolute nightmare. The longer chapters, it doesn't matter, because if it's 1,698, it's near enough. But if it's a 1-minute chapter, that difference between 169 words and 170 words, somebody's going to sit there and count the... So whenever I was seeing things, and it's just like every now and again there's a typo, oh, I can take out that word. And it's just like, no, I need to now find somewhere to put in a word, and so on. So it provided challenges. I also get very frustrated with murder mystery stories at one level because people do die. And having spent so much time dealing with plane crashes, I didn't like it, and I think sometimes it's a little bit lazy to be killing characters. So I set myself the challenge of not killing off a character. Yeah, that one didn't work. But I did manage to do it in another book. I'm not going to say which one. Spoilers, just in case you ever choose to read any of my books. And I don't know how many of the rest of you do this, but in both my academic writing and the novels, I've always got Easter eggs of various different sorts, whether it's referring to favourite music or whatever. There are little things which I do. I like to play games. I think it keeps us on our toes if you're thinking about how to do the writing and play these games. So I started putting the book together, and initially I thought I was going to write it under a pseudonym, because I thought that would give me more freedom about what to write. Also, I was planning there's going to be some, shall we call it adult content in it, and I thought that would probably creep out my students if they read that and saw my name on it. So I was originally planning that I was going to write it under a pseudonym. And then one day I was watching the movie version of the book Climbers High, which is related to my research on the JAL crash. And when that scene came up and it said the author's name, I suddenly thought, in that, we've all had that moment. If you write novels, admit it, you've all had that moment. One day you're in the shower and you're just having the dream that some Hollywood directors phoned you up and they want to turn the book into a movie and everything. And I just thought, if I'm in the cinema and I see the pseudonym go up, it's not going to hit home in the same way as seeing my own name up. I mean, this is very narcissistic. I apologize. But I decided, stuff it. I will put my real name up there. The only difference is that I drop the middle initial normally for the novels, partly because Amazon couldn't cope with a middle initial, but there you go. So that's what I decided to do. I actually find it quite helpful having the difference at one level, so that when I'm writing my novels, although Christopher P. Hood is somewhere in there keeping an eye on what I'm writing, Christopher Hood is much more chilled and relaxed and has the freedom to just write whatever. The usual academic boundaries are effectively gone. I can take on a different persona. I was chatting with someone earlier on. Sometimes when I'm writing a novel, I feel like it's almost in a dream state. I'm writing out the images I'm seeing in my head, and I find it very relaxing and freeing in that way. But I know the academic bit is in there now and again to just ground things and sort of be saying, no, a Japanese person wouldn't say that, or no, you can't do that, or whatever it may be. Once I realized I was going to put my name on it, it was incredibly freeing, because instead of almost trying to make out this book wasn't written by me, the situation where I was sort of thinking, I mean, the other reason why I decided I'd put my name on it was actually just, again, because of students. Just in case one of my students bought it, and it's just like, this book, Dr. Hood, is very geeky about Shinkansen. Did you happen to write this? I probably wouldn't be able to deny it. So I thought, put my name on it. And once I did that, I thought, that's now taken off that barrier. I don't have to pretend this isn't by me, so I can be putting a lot more of my experiences and some of these little stories I sometimes tell students and so on, and various other bits and pieces. And so that was very freeing. So I was able to actually bring in even the JAL crash to some degree, just in passing in the first book. Around about the time that I was doing the book, I also discovered about content tourism, although at the time I wasn't really fully aware of the term. The first time I did contents tourism, very much did not know the term, was in around about 2000 when I stayed at the New Otani. I was coming out to Japan on a business trip. The hotel booking had been done, and as soon as the car pulled up the taxi which we were brought to, there's like a group of us, it's more of a minibus than a taxi, were brought to the hotel, my eyes just lit up and it's just like, oh my God, it's Osato chemicals from You Only Live Twice. A film I grew up with as a child, having recorded it off the TV and watched it once every few weeks on TV. I had no idea this building still existed. Having known it existed, it seemed appropriate to then put it into my novel. Problem is, I didn't take enough notes when I stayed there the first time because I didn't know I was going to write the novel. So I managed to come up with an excuse for why a university should pay for me to stay at the New Otani rather than another hotel on a future trip to Japan so that I could do some research for the novel. But shh, they don't know that. Actually, it doesn't matter anymore. I don't work for them. Having finally completed the novel, as I said, I went through a little bit of a hiatus. Didn't get much written for a while and then suddenly got back to it. The big issue is where to publish. Okay. As I said, I've written a lot of books, so I'm used to dealing with publishers. But it came at a time when I had a big run-in with Routledge, the company who have published all of my main academic books. So the first edition of Japan the Basics was 2013. I had a big run-in with how they were handling it and so on. It demoralized me from writing academic writing at all. If you look at my publications, there's a massive gap in a lot of my publications at that point. And I just thought, I don't need to be dealing with this. Publishers, in my view, sorry if there's anybody here from the publishing world, I love you all, please give me a contract. I was getting very frustrated with, they don't do that much other than literally print the book and then charge very high prices. They talk about marketing it. I've done more marketing for my books, whether self-published or published by Routledge. They really don't do a huge amount. So I thought, what is the point in going through this? Do I want the hassle of agents and all the rest of it? So in the end, I decided I would self-publish my novels. Keeping in mind the self-publishing world and how people feel about it is very different now than 25, 30, 40 years ago, when it was very much just seen as a pure vanity thing. There is still vanity involved, let's not kid ourselves about this. But there are other elements to it as well. And although I initially went through Lulu, in the end for convenience and so on, and also a variety of other reasons, I pulled my books from Lulu and everything's now done through Amazon for better or for worse, given what that company is like. I want to change tack for a second and ask a different question. Why do we write? Why do we put this through ourselves? I mean, we can write the book, we don't actually have to publish it, or we could publish it in a very limited form so that only we've really got access to it. And I still think there's something very satisfying about that. In the same way that I'm much more proud of my undergraduate dissertation than I am of my graduation certificate, because I can hold this physical thing and say, this was the culmination of my studies. So at one level, there is a nice element to writing. At one level, I think the question is wrong. It's not why do we do it, but why not? I think there are just things, I think there are times when it's difficult to write, but a lot of the time I think it is actually quite fun. There are lots of different elements, the planning, the conversations that you have, sometimes just the whole setup. I write standing up, and I just like being stood there, and I'm having music playing and everything. These days when I'm back in Cardiff, I've got a record player next to me. I'm standing and turning records. This is as close as I will ever get to being a DJ. And despite how nerve-wracking it actually is putting your stuff out there, whether it's my academic stuff or novels, I still feel it's the right thing to be doing. But some of this also then comes down to who are we reaching and what's the content. So I've done a variety of different academic things, articles, books, textbooks. the reach of these is very different. I suspect the number of people who've read one of my academic articles, such as the one that was in this journal, we're probably talking only just about into double digits. Dealing with disaster in Japan, based on sales and likely library, we're probably talking about a couple of thousand people. Japan, the basics, maybe 10,000 people out of 7 billion on the planet. It's not a very big reach, but if it's reached somebody and it's made an impact, I feel it's worthwhile. There's also the reach that I have through teaching, which I think is sometimes more significant than some of the writing, that you touch people's lives in a particular way. I also do writing through writing on my blog site, and that can have potentially a very big reach as well. But it's not just about reach. Sometimes if it just reaches one person and has an impact, that is sufficient. And I think there are times where we have a moral duty to do so. There's a limit to what an education system can do, and more there's a limit to what the world of the media is prepared to do or can do. And I think sometimes it's down to us as authors to pick up the gaps and doing things. I have a PhD student, Emily Bush, who is doing research about looking at an eco-critical lens to disaster narratives, and she's focusing on Japan. But her research reminds me of the significance of the American TV movie, The Day After, which Ronald Reagan admitted in his memoir completely changed his attitude on nuclear weapons. Didn't necessarily lead to a complete change in policy, but it did start the process of us having treaties which helped the Soviet Union, subsequently Russia and USA, reduce their stockpile of nuclear weapons. Treaties which, of course, now are starting to become undone, thanks to somebody who will remain nameless. I can't say that our novels will ever have the sort of impact that a program like that will have. But as we heard, some of you would have heard in the previous presentation, talking about various things also to do with climate crisis and so on, I do think we have a role to be testing ideas, pushing boundaries. This is what literature can, and I think sometimes should be doing. And so part of this is what I set out to do, is to get that sort of educating element in there. And of course, it's always there in writing. Yeah, it's always there, and it's in all sorts of writing. So whilst I've been out in Japan on this trip, having always told my students for years and years and years that I'm not into manga, I've managed to get through all 21 volumes of Zom-hyaku in the last 2.5 months. And one of the things I found interesting in reading it is the number of times where it discusses elements of Japanese history or culture. Characters talking to each other, but effectively talking to the reader, saying, I bet you didn't know this. And some of it, I think, is filling in gaps in people's knowledge about their own country, which I find very interesting. At one level, I shouldn't have been that surprised about it, because the only other manga I'd ever read is Kurosagi Shitai Takuhaibin, the Kurosagi Corpse delivery service, which I only came across by chance when I was doing a search on Amazon JP for any books related to the JAL crash. And on the English edition of this book, the translator had added a note saying, these 2 pages, he thinks, or she thinks, I'm not sure if the gender was clear, might be sort of a nod to the JL 123 crash, which I totally agree with. I read this manga, or this particular volume, found it was quite enjoyable, so actually went back to the beginning and read quite a few of them. And in some of them, discovered pages where it was talking about things like the rape of Nanjing, for example. And it's just like, this is dealing with issues which are not going to be in Japanese textbooks. And so I found that element very interesting. So I think there's a parallel there, and you can find this in all books. And just to give a plug for a particular book, not written by me, this is written by a friend of mine. He's authored 2 books, so The Cat in the City, this is his 2nd book, 4 Seasons in Japan. He's also done a translation of Natsume Sosaki's I'm a Cat, just came out in September. And I've just been re-listening to the book because part of it is set in Onomichi and Hiroshima, which I was visiting last week. And within it, as well as discussing the bombing of Hiroshima, it's also got a character who goes to Mount Tanigawa, which by chance brings us back to some of my JAL crash and the novel Climbers High. That mountain also features in the novel I'm currently writing, but it's got these educational elements. It can be dropped in there. But there has to be a balance. Yeah, you can't have it all being just about these things because then it's basically a history book. Yeah, there has to be a balance. It's what the author of Climbers High, Hideo Yokoyama, calls pillars of truth. His idea is if you've got a story, if you can imagine a story being sat here, it has to stand on these pillars of truth. These pillars of truth don't necessarily have to be historical truths. It can be just in terms of the characters being believable. And he says, as long as you've got these pillars of truth, the reader is quite happy for the bits in between to effectively flip it and not care that it's less accurate, or they start imagining that this bit might be accurate as well. And it's something that I have been looking out for when I studied disaster movies and stuff, but it's something I'm very keen to try and make sure is in my writing, that it's got these pillars which people can go, yeah, that just rings true. And then they might give me the benefit of the doubt on some of the other bits where, in the end, we're trying to write something that's also entertaining. And real life isn't always quite so entertaining, so sometimes you do have to push the barriers a little bit. So bring me back onto some of the other issues that I wanted to talk about. I was watching Shinkansen Dai Bakuha earlier this year when it came out, which is a updated version of a 1975 movie. And it's got scenes walking around within JR East. It doesn't make any pretenses otherwise. It's very much JR East. In my book, set on a JR East train, I decided to write in a little paragraph saying, one day JR East was taken over by JR Northeast. And just change the company name that way, just to cover myself off from many things. But I was thinking about how much of I've seen in this film. I've been to these places. And I talk about it in my first novel. And when I was watching the movie, it was reminding me of when I went to Maibara one time on a research trip with somebody from JR Central. And they're saying, I'm going to tell you something now. It's fine for you to know it, just don't write it in your book about the Shinkansen. I've had so many conversations like that. And part of this is for my advice to you, make sure you make it really clear in your notes somewhere or another which bits you're allowed to know and which bits you're allowed to make public. Some of you may have picked up earlier on when chatting to the cameraman down here, the videos of the Shinkansen, I'm not meant to put out in the public domain. Okay, it's fine for people to see, but it can't go up on YouTube and stuff like that for security reasons and all these sort of things. There are certain things I've seen and experienced where I think I have to be careful what to include in novels, because if I put too much information, it's probably going to burn bridges. I'm not going to be allowed to go back on future times, should any of these companies actually ever read any of my work, which is unlikely. But I think sometimes it's actually more than that. I think sometimes it's about conversations as well. It's that type of thing. I think very much about some of the people I've met when doing my research about the JAL crash, and some of the conversations I've had with families who lost loved ones, where I think this is so powerful, but I just can't put it in any of my writing. Not in a way it could be identifiable back to people. And so there are times where some of those conversations can't go in my research books, but in a more fictionalized situation, you can bring it in, because it adds a lot more depth to a character, bringing in some of these things. But I think it is very difficult when doing all of this. Researching for a novel is, in my view, probably equivalent at least to doing research for an article, maybe not a full monograph. A monograph is 100,000 words. Each chapter probably 8,000 words or so. Based on the research I've done for articles, I would say research for a novel needs at least as much as an article, but sometimes, depending on what you're doing, it's as much as you would do for a research book. And when I get very frustrated, I'm one of those people, when I read a novel, I always read the acknowledgements. And it's very noticeable in the books which I thought were good, the acknowledgements go on for such a long time of all the various police officers and all the rest of it, people they've spoken to. And if you are primarily seeing yourself as a novelist, take pride in doing that research. It's really important. I think sometimes novelists, because it's fiction, it's easy for people to sort of think, oh, it's just it's make believe and all the rest of it. And you always almost like look down on yourself, let alone start thinking about how other people see you. Whereas I would say novelists are fundamentally, first and foremost, researchers. They're no different to academics. It's just that they don't go into a classroom most of the time. Yeah, it's the same sort of process if you're going, depending on the novel you write, but usually there's going to be research there in some way. And if you are researching and interviewing people, check whether they're happy to be named in acknowledgements. And as long as they say yes, make sure you name them. It's amazing how touched people are seeing their own name in print. Plus, usually pretty much guaranteed one sale. Just saying. Unless you want to give them a free copy, of course, but anyway. So there are challenges in here, but there's also another side to this. As somebody who's an academic, I know that my top business card, which is the one I've got at the moment from the Japan Foundation, opens many more doors than the second one. Being associated with Japan Foundation, if I want, because I got an honorary professorship from Cardiff University, I could still have a business card from there with my Cardiff. That opens doors. Contacting one of the JR companies, for example, and say, I'm a novelist, can I come and research? I'm not sure how many doors get opened at that point. That's where you're much more reliant on the situation where you happen to go to the local izakaya and you're sat next to a person and you find out they do a job related to something connected to your current novel, which is literally what happened to me earlier this week, where I sat down next to a guy, we were just talking over our shochu. What do you do? And he goes, oh, I work in the police force. It's just like, okay, then now we're talking. Excellent. Yes, I'll have your business card. Thank you very much. One of the great things about not working at a university anymore, when I'm doing these trips, I don't have to worry about research ethics. If any of you work at a British university, American universities, I'm guessing, are probably the same. The forms we have to fill in, the committees that have to investigate our work, the forms that people are expected to tick. I kid you not, the Cardiff University Research Ethics form, which I meant to give to every one of my interviewees, is 10 pages long. I've had interviews turned down because people have looked at the form, even if I've got it translated into Japanese, and they've got so freaked out by the size of the form, they just didn't want to have anything to do with it. Whereas in the end, most people just want to know you're going to behave ethically. And if you're not, they usually know what to do about it. There are legal recourses for these things. So it's nice to have that freedom. So, pulling some of this together, we need to get the right balance. Yeah, between educating and entertaining and so on. I think it can have both. I think it should have both. I like Yokoyama's idea of these pillars of truth. But an additional challenge for many of us, I suspect, is also the issue that all of my novels so far have been set in Japan. And the protagonists of books 2 and 3 here, many of the characters in the first book are Japanese. And so I'm not Japanese, in case you hadn't spotted. Although I literally the other day, on Wednesday, as I was finishing a meal at a restaurant, one of the people serving me asked, are you Japanese? And I was just like, no. And she goes, but your Japanese is so good. And I thought, if this is where we're getting to, that some people are questioning whether you're Japanese based on your mannerisms and how well you speak the language, this is a very good day in my book, that it's not focused on ethnicity, but that's another topic. There are still limits to how much I know about Japan and so on. And so you do have to talk to people sometimes and just check, would you say this? Would you behave in this particular way? But I mean, I've been doing this for long enough that generally I'm fairly confident with what I've written. So, returning to the question about why I write, there is also another reason why I do it. And it brings us back to my opening words. One day you will die. One day I will die. And when I do, everything that's in here is gone. And I feel as though I have a responsibility to pass on my knowledge, my experiences to other people. I hope it will put a smile on people's faces sometimes, make them laugh. As someone who suffers from depression and is on medication for it, my goal every day is to put a smile on somebody's face. If I can go home one day, every day, having made somebody laugh, even better. If somebody's done an eye roll at one of my dad jokes, even better. It's a good day. But also I feel as though I have a responsibility to pass on my knowledge and experiences, the things which many other people can't do, but through what I've written, maybe it's useful for them, for their own writing, their own research, whatever it may be. That I feel as though is a responsibility, and that's why I will continue to write blogs, novels, and so on. Thank you very much for listening. I'll open it up for questions. Yes, please. I saw your hand first.
You mentioned content tourism,
and
I was wondering what you thought about the Yanto Shrine in Cardiff Bay.
That really shocked me. Okay, so for people who don't know it, in Cardiff Bay, so Cardiff where I still currently live most of the time, down in the Bay area, there is a shrine which is mostly just a memorial wall with lots of flowers and so on. The first time I saw it was around the time I was doing my research for the JAL crash, and I just thought, wow, somebody's died. And it just looked like a temporary thing. It was just sort of flowers and a few pieces of paper. And then when I went back some months later, because I don't go down to the Bay a great deal, it was still there, but had gained in size. And I thought, that's unusual, because in Britain, generally, people don't like these things hanging around for too long. So I went and checked it out and found all of the messages were in relation to the killing off of a fictional character in a TV program called Torchwood, which is a spin-off from Doctor Who, which is a very famous science fiction program. That memorial is still there today. We're now talking 15 years on. It is marked on Google Maps. And I think it must just really confuse anybody who goes to Cardiff Bay not knowing this TV program, which is a very niche TV program. It didn't have a huge viewership. I don't have any particular issue with it.
Yeah, I found it moving. Like,
yeah.
Someone said, go to that, and I went, and it really felt like being in between worlds.
Yeah, it is, and I think it shows again the power of fiction. I mean, British people generally, I think, are seen as being quite reserved and not showing emotion, which is why the reaction, the outpouring of emotion that was seen with the death of Princess Diana and all the flowers and everything like that is almost without precedent. But it opened a door which hasn't fully closed, I think. But I still think some people struggle to deal with this. I think the government struggles to handle how we deal with things. We don't have I mean, I've just read this week, I think it is, that Britain is setting up a day of remembrance to be on the calendar every year for remembering the victims of terrorism. We don't have a day of remembrance for the 150,000 people or so who died thanks to government incompetence over the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think sometimes fiction plays a role because it allows people to express emotions and deal with situations which sometimes they struggle to in daily life. I think next.
In the presentation you talked about balance, but how do you manage that your novel hijacking Japan didn't end up being a non-fictional research work Did you follow any rules so that to prevent you to include too much technical information so that the action doesn't move on? Or?
I think that's almost down to how the readers feel about it. I mean, it's something which I don't. I mean, one of the presentations earlier on today, someone was sort of talking about how you have to cut back on some of the content sometimes because you need to be thinking of the reader and all the rest of it. And it's just like, which reader? Some readers want to have lots of geeky information about a train. Some readers want to have lots of conversation. And of course, we've all read novels like that. There are some novels where it seems to be just constantly, inverted commas, conversation. It's just like, yeah, but what's the person thinking? What are they wearing? Give me some detail. But some people like that style. So, I mean, to answer your question, it was a little bit of a balancing act again. Sometimes it was just purely down to the challenges that I'd set myself, that I had this word limit. So if I knew how long a chapter was going to be, I had a word limit. And so sometimes that provided the situation where I can't go into great detail about something technical. Other chapters, I got plenty of space. Sometimes I play around with things by just creating a new police agency or something like that, which gives me freedom to be creating a whole office space which I haven't experienced. It may coincidentally be quite similar to one. So it's a bit of a balancing act. I mean, in the end, although seeing these places was very much helping to give me direction at times, I don't think anything I've said and put into my novels actually people can't find in the public domain anyway. So I don't think there will be any issues in that respect. But in the end, it is very much a fictional story. And it becomes clear. So the book is effectively in two halves, and the second half is clearly much more, I hope, fictional. Given the current Prime Minister, I'm slightly scared, actually, it's not quite as fictional as it could be. But yeah, in the end, it wasn't too much of an issue, I hope. But I have had one reader sort of say, when I was dealing with the bit where I sort of made up this excuse for JR Northeast rather than JR East, they said, this sounded just a little bit too grating and academic. And I said, yeah, but I had to put it in there. I wanted to cover myself off. I don't want JR East knocking on the door and saying, hold on, you've used our company name and stuff. I think we got time for one more question. At the back, yes, please.
I travelled from across Japan with Shinkansen. I love the Shinkansen. Thank you for writing about it. I tried to write a book using my laptop. First 100 kilometres or so, it got to a point where it's a bit jarring. There's a slight jarring in the Shinkansen where it makes it impossible to write a book. So I used my phone, and I could just type the phone, type my title with my two thumbs.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got to Hokkaido and came back to Tokyo, I finished the book.
Excellent.
What is interesting is just a slight jarring in the Shinkansen. You don't notice it unless you're looking for it. It's like an unsettling presence in a way. And I'm just wondering from you, what unsettles you still about writing about disaster of rural knowledge?
Honestly, nothing. I don't find any boundaries now, partly because I can just go into this other zone to some degree. I mean, when I started doing my research about the JAL crash, I thought it was going to be incredibly morbid and dark, to the extent I tried to plan the research so that I wouldn't need to go to the crash site at all, which, looking back, I mean, how's that going to work? Now I list the crash site as one of my favorite places in Japan. I love going up there. It's effectively Seichi, it's a religious site. It's seemingly one of the only places in Japan where you can't get a mobile phone signal, which I find very nice, that you can be just lost in your own thoughts. I got some very bizarre stories to tell about situations I've had at the crash site, but I like going up there. So I don't feel any particular concerns in that respect. There aren't many storylines I wouldn't consider. I've kind of just got used to it, I think. The hardest thing I would ever find about writing, the thing that stops me from writing or just functioning, is silence. I cannot deal with silence. When I open up my computer, the first thing that gets turned on is iTunes. so I can I'm not old school. I've got digital copies for everything. I do not stream. I know enough musicians and know how they get screwed by Spotify and others. I turn on music. And most of the time, I'm not even aware of what I've listened to. Sometimes at the end of the day, it's quite fun to go back through and see what played. And it's just like, I've got no memory of some of these songs. But music is very important to me. My first tattoos, which I got done in the last few weeks in Japan, are both music related. And in Tokyo 2020 Vision and 4, the chapter titles are all names of songs by a particular band. So it was Rebecca, Japanese band for Tokyo 2020 Vision, and 4, it was the Swedish band Roxette. So again, little Easter egg type thing, but I need music. Silence can't work. And on that note, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. If anybody's old school and rather than using QR codes and everything would like a business card, just come up. I've got a massive pile of them.
Get that one.